My name is Avery Bennett. I'm 31 years old. And the strange thing about the moment your life begins to split open is that it almost never arrives with noise. No thunder, no screaming, no cinematic crash that makes everyone in the room turn and stare. Sometimes it comes softly. Sometimes it enters your life wearing a familiar face, using a familiar voice, and saying one sentence so calmly that your mind refuses to process it at first. 3 days ago, I still had a boyfriend. Or maybe that isn't the right way to say it. 3 days ago, I still had a man I thought respected me. His name was Ethan Calloway. We had been together for 2 years. In the beginning, people used to say we made sense in a way that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. I'm an architect. I build my days around measurements, sequencing, structure. I like things mapped out. I like angles that meet where they're supposed to meet. I like knowing what holds weight and what only looks pretty from a distance. Ethan was not like that. Ethan was instinct and charm and atmosphere. He moved through life like every room had already agreed to love him before he got there. He called himself a people person, which was a polished way of saying he trusted momentum more than intention. He made choices based on feeling, based on energy, based on what sounded fun in the moment. For a long time, I told myself that difference was balance. I was the frame. He was the light hitting it. We had been living together for about 8 months in an apartment I absolutely loved. Open layout, huge windows, clean lines, brick on one wall, warm oak on the floors, enough room for me to turn the living room into something dramatic without making it look staged. The lease was solely in my name. I had signed it before he moved in. I paid about 70% of the rent and all the utilities, mostly because I made more money, and because, at the time, it felt easier that way. I also paid for most of the things that made the apartment feel impressive. That mattered later. At the time, it just felt like building a life. I'm a little obsessive about smart home systems. Not in an annoying way, at least that's what I used to tell people, but in a way that makes me deeply happy when tech behaves exactly the way I designed it to. Over the last year, I had built a custom system that ran our lighting, music, and the 3 large digital art displays in the living room. It wasn't some generic subscription service or a voice assistant hooked to cheap bulbs. It was mine. A dedicated server in the hall closet, custom scripts, zoned audio, automated light scenes, timed transitions. I called it Halo. Ethan loved showing it off. He called it our signature move. So when spring finally came and the weather turned soft enough to leave the windows cracked after sunset, I decided to throw a party. A real one. Not just drinks and chips in the kitchen. I'm talking curated playlists, catered food, high-end liquor, lights set to warm amber, digital displays rotating minimalist landscapes that shifted with the music. I spent weeks on it. $1,200 on catering. $800 on tequila, whiskey, and gin for the bar cart. Hours calibrating the light presets. Everything was timed. Everything was ready. And then, 3 days before the party, Ethan dropped the sentence that split the floor under me. It was Tuesday. He had been strange all day. Not guilty exactly, not nervous, more like distracted in a way that suggested he had already rehearsed the conversation and was just waiting for the moment to perform it. He was standing near the kitchen island, looking at his phone instead of at me. "Hey," he said. That was the first sign. Not babe, not Avery. Just hey. I looked up from my laptop. "Hey." He rubbed the back of his neck. "So, you know how Sophie is in town?" My stomach tightened before I even answered. Sophie. His ex-girlfriend. 29. Blonde in an expensive-looking, effortless way. The kind of woman who seemed to have perfected the art of appearing casual while making sure every detail was sharp enough to cut somebody. She was the ex he always described as ancient history, and yet somehow still came up too often in conversation. Not constantly, just enough to leave a residue. Enough for me to notice. "Yeah," I said carefully. He finally looked at me. "I ran into her earlier, and I invited her to the party Friday." I stared at him. Not because I didn't hear him. Because I did. Too clearly. "You invited your ex-girlfriend," I said slowly, "to our housewarming party without asking me." He exhaled like I was already exhausting him. "God, Avery, don't make it weird." There it was. That little pivot. The move where a person does something inconsiderate and then immediately shifts the burden onto your reaction. "I'm not making it weird," I said. "It is weird." "No, it's not. We're friends." "You're not friends." "We are now." I closed my laptop. "Ethan, this is our party. For our friends. Why would you invite your ex without even talking to me first?" He rolled his eyes, and that was the moment something inside me went still. Not angry. Still. Because eye rolling is not confusion. It's contempt wearing boredom's face. She wanted to see the place, he said. I ran into her. It came up naturally, and I said she should stop by. It would have been rude not to. I stood there looking at him, at the kitchen I paid for, in the apartment I leased, listening to him tell me that my discomfort was less important than his need to seem easygoing to a woman he used to sleep with. I'm not comfortable with that, I said. He laughed once, short, sharp. Why? I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because there is something surreal about a man asking you why you are uncomfortable after he has gone out of his way to place you in a humiliating position. Because she's your ex, I said. Because you didn't ask me. Because it changes the entire energy of the night. Because I don't want to spend the evening pretending this is normal. His expression hardened, and that, more than the invitation itself, was the real beginning. Wow, he said. So that's where we are. What does that mean? It means I didn't realize you were this insecure. The word landed exactly the way he meant it to. A diagnosis, a dismissal, a way to make me defend myself instead of examining what he had done. I'm not insecure, I said. I'm telling you I have a boundary. He crossed his arms. Sophie is coming. I already told her she could. I'm not uninviting her just because you're in a mood. In a mood. It's funny how quickly a woman's clarity becomes a mood when a man doesn't like what it costs him. I stepped around the island slowly, not because I was intimidated, but because I knew if I moved too fast, I would speak from anger instead of precision. Then you need to hear me clearly, I said. I do not want your ex-girlfriend at this party. He stared at me for a second. Then his face changed. Not into guilt, not into concern, into challenge. He took a breath and said, just be cool about it. Seriously, Avery, if you're going to act paranoid and weird, it just makes me think we have a bigger problem. I said nothing, and then he delivered the line that ended us. Be cool, he said, or it's over. There are moments in life when pain arrives as heat, and there are moments when it arrives as ice. This one was ice. Everything in me cooled at once, because that sentence told me everything I needed to know. He was not asking for trust. He was demanding submission. He was holding our relationship in one hand and my self-respect in the other, assuming I would drop the second to keep the first. I looked at him for a long time, really looked. At the confidence in his posture, at the fact that he wasn't nervous, at how sure he was that I would fold, that I would choose peace over dignity, that I would smooth over my own humiliation and call it maturity, because he had decided that was the price of staying with him. And suddenly, like a blueprint coming into focus, I saw the flaw. Not in the argument, in the foundation. You're right, I said quietly. His face softened immediately, too quickly. That was how I knew this had always been a test. A satisfied little smile tugged at his mouth. See, he said, I knew you'd get it. I held his gaze. No, I said, I mean you're right. His smile faltered. I'll be very cool. Friday night arrived warm and golden, with that soft spring air that makes people linger in doorways and laugh louder than they mean to. By 7:30, the apartment looked stunning. Halo was running perfectly. The lights were a deep amber wash. The playlist was seamless. The art displays glowed with quiet, shifting landscapes. The food was laid out beautifully. The bar cart caught the light like jewelry. Everything looked exactly the way I had imagined. That was the strange part. Sometimes the last beautiful thing in your old life is also the stage where it dies. My friends Ben and Lucas showed up first, then a few of my colleagues from the firm, then more people. The place filled easily. I moved through the rooms smiling, refilling drinks, taking compliments, adjusting music levels from my phone without anyone noticing. Ethan was in his element too, laughing, touching shoulders, being adored. I watched him from across the room more than once. Not with longing, with distance. He had no idea. Around 9, the doorbell rang. Ethan turned toward me from across the living room and gave me a look. Not pleading, warning. Be cool. I smiled. Don't worry, I said. I've got it. I walked to the door and opened it. There she was. Sophie. She was exactly what I expected. Elegant in a deliberately undone way. Dark silk blouse, jeans that probably cost more than they looked like they should, perfume light enough to suggest intimacy instead of announce itself. She held a bottle of wine in one hand and a smile in the other. Avery, she said. Hi, I'm Sophie. I gave her my warmest hostess smile. Sophie, I said. Welcome. I'm so glad you could make it. For a second, she seemed surprised. Good. Behind me, I heard Ethan approaching before I saw him. Sophie, he said too brightly. She stepped past me and hugged him. Not scandalously, not obviously, just a little too long. Just enough to say history without words. Then she kissed his cheek. I watched the moment settle over the room around us like invisible dust. Not many people noticed. I did. And that was enough. I turned to Ethan. My smile was still in place. Well, I said softly, she's here. He blinked. My job is done. His forehead creased. What? I reached for my jacket from the hook by the door. His expression changed instantly. Avery, what are you doing? Leaving. The word hit him harder than any scream could have. Don't do this, he hissed under his breath. People are here. I slipped my phone into my pocket. I know. This is dramatic. No, I said. This is exactly what you asked for. Sophie looked between us, suddenly less polished. Ethan grabbed my wrist lightly, not enough to make a scene, just enough to expose instinct. I looked down at his hand. He let go. I turned to Sophie with perfect calm. She's all yours, I said. And then I looked back at Ethan. I was just leaving. The hallway outside the apartment was quieter than it should have been. Or maybe that was just me. Because when something inside you finally snaps into alignment, the world doesn't get louder. It gets still. The door closed behind me with a soft, ordinary click. No slam, no drama. Just a sound so small it almost felt disrespectful to everything that had just ended. I took 3 steps down the hallway before I heard it open again. Avery, what the hell? It wasn't Ethan. It was Ben. Of course it was. He had always been the one who noticed first when something wasn't right. I turned slowly. He was standing in the doorway, one hand still on the frame, his expression somewhere between confusion and realization. Lucas was right behind him. They had both seen enough. It's over, I said. Ben blinked. What? She gave me an ultimatum, I corrected myself quietly. I accepted it. Lucas frowned. Wait, what ultimatum? I didn't answer immediately, because saying it out loud made it sound smaller than it was. Be cool, I said finally, or it's over. Ben let out a short breath through his nose. Not a laugh, not quite anger either. Just recognition. Jesus, he muttered. Yeah, I said. Behind them, the music was still playing. The soft, steady rhythm of something lo-fi and carefully curated. Laughter drifted out into the hall like nothing had changed. For a moment, I stood there listening to it. To my party. To my apartment. To a version of my life that no longer belonged to me. Then I turned toward the elevator. Let's get a drink, I said. Ben glanced back once more at the open doorway, then shut it firmly behind him. Yeah, he said. Yeah, let's go. The elevator ride down was silent. Lucas kept glancing at me like he was waiting for me to break. Cry, yell, explain, something. I didn't. I just stood there, watching the numbers descend. 10, 9, 8. At 5, my phone started buzzing. Once. Then again. Then continuously. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Ethan. I let it vibrate in my hand until we reached the lobby. Then I unlocked the screen. 3 missed calls. 6 texts. A few more coming in as I watched. Ethan. Where are you going? Ethan. Avery. This isn't funny, Ethan. Come back upstairs. Ethan. You're embarrassing me, Ethan. Don't do this right now. I almost smiled at that one. Don't do this right now. As if there had ever been a right time to refuse disrespect. Ben leaned over slightly. You gonna answer? Yeah, I said. I typed one message. Then I hit send. And before I could second guess it, I blocked his number. We stepped out into the cool night air, and for the first time since Tuesday, I felt something close to relief. Not happiness. Not yet. But clarity. There's a difference. We walked 2 blocks to a low-key whiskey bar we'd been to 100 times before. No lines. No music loud enough to drown out your thoughts. Just dim lighting, worn wood, and bartenders who didn't ask questions. Perfect. We slid into a booth. Ben flagged the bartender. 3. He didn't specify. He didn't need to. When the glasses arrived, Lucas leaned forward. Okay, he said, you need to explain. So I did. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Just clearly. I told them about Tuesday. About Sophie. About the invitation. About the ultimatum. About the moment I realized he wasn't negotiating. He was testing. By the time I finished, Lucas was staring at the table like it had personally offended him. Ben just nodded slowly. He thought you'd fold, he said. Yeah, I replied. And you didn't. I took a sip of whiskey. No, I said, I didn't. There was a pause. Then Lucas leaned back, shaking his head. Still, he said, what about all of that? He gestured vaguely, like the apartment existed somewhere above us in the air. The party, the food, the system. You spent weeks on that. I set my glass down carefully. Not my party, I said. Not my problem. Ben's mouth twitched slightly. Damn, he said under his breath. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Opened the app. Halo. My system. My code. My design. The interface lit up instantly. Every room, every light, every speaker, every display laid out exactly the way I had built it. Perfect. Predictable. Obedient. Unlike people. What are you doing? Lucas asked. I didn't look up. Being cool, I said. Then I tapped the script. According to Ben, what happened next upstairs was memorable. The music cut first. Mid-beat. No fade. No warning. Just silence. Then the lights. All 32 smart bulbs snapped from warm amber to their default state. Harsh, sterile, blinding white. The kind of lighting that makes everyone look slightly sick and deeply uncomfortable. Like a hospital or an interrogation room. Then the art displays went black. One by one. 3 large panels that had been softly glowing all night. Gone. Just blank screens staring back at a room full of people who suddenly didn't know where to look. 30 people. Standing in silence. In bad lighting. Without music. Without atmosphere. Without me. Ben said Ethan froze for a second. Like his brain couldn't quite process what was happening. Then the questions started. What just happened? Is this part of it? Did the power go out? Except it hadn't. The fridge was still humming. The hallway light outside still worked. Just everything that made the space feel alive had been stripped away. Ethan apparently went straight for the wall panel. Tapped it. Nothing. Tapped it again. Nothing. Come on, he muttered. Sophie stood nearby, arms crossed now, her earlier ease gone. This is weird, she said. Yeah, weird. That's one word for it. Ben told me that was the moment the energy broke. Not cracked. Broke. Because people don't stay where they feel uncomfortable. And nothing makes discomfort louder than silence under bad lighting. My colleagues were the first to move. Polite. Efficient. Oh, wow, look at the time. I've got an early morning. I think my dog might be sick. One by one, they started leaving. Then more, and more. Within 10 minutes, the apartment that had taken me weeks to build into something beautiful was emptying out like air from a punctured lung. By the end of it, it was Ethan, Sophie, and a handful of her friends, standing in a dead, white, silent room, surrounded by expensive food going cold. My phone buzzed again, and again, and again. I glanced down. Unknown number. Another. And another. Then a message came through from a name I recognized. Alana. Sophie's best friend. Of course. Alana. What is wrong with you? Alana. Karen is crying. Alana. You're a monster. I stared at the screen for a second, then locked it. Let me guess, Ben said. They're not taking it well. Not particularly, I said. Lucas snorted. Funny, he muttered. I took another sip of whiskey. Then my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Another text. Unknown, turn it back on. Unknown, Avery. This isn't funny. Unknown, you ruined everything. I watched the messages come in. Then I opened a new thread. Typed one sentence. Hit send. You told me to be cool, or it's over. I chose over. Please have your things out of my apartment by the end of the month. I set my phone face down on the table, and for the first time all night, I breathed. Ben raised his glass slightly. To boundaries, he said. I picked mine up. To boundaries, I echoed. We drank. The fallout started immediately. By the time we got back to Ben's place, my phone had turned into a vibrating brick. Calls, texts, voicemails, from numbers I didn't know, from people who suddenly had very strong opinions about a relationship they had never been part of. I didn't answer any of them. I didn't need to, because I already knew how this part would go. The story would shift. I would become dramatic, cold, cruel. He would become misunderstood, embarrassed, wronged. It's almost comforting how predictable that script is. I muted everything, set my phone aside, and let the silence settle in. I stayed at Ben's that weekend. We ordered pizza, watched bad movies, played video games like we were 22 again instead of 31. It was simple. And after everything that had just happened, simple felt like oxygen. But by Sunday night, reality started pressing in again. Because no matter how clean the break felt emotionally, logistically, it was about to get complicated. The apartment was still mine. The lease was still mine. And Ethan? Ethan was still inside it. I picked up my phone Monday morning, unblocked his number, just long enough to handle what came next. Me. I'm serious. The relationship is over. I need you out by the 31st. Let me know when you'll be moving your things. The reply came almost instantly. Ethan? You can't be serious, Ethan. You're kicking me out over a party? Ethan. After 2 years? I stared at the screen, then typed. Me. You don't live here. You live with me, and now you don't. There was a pause. Then, Ethan. You're insane. Ethan. You tricked me. Ethan. You're a cold, calculating psycho. I exhaled slowly. There it was. Right on schedule. Me. Telling you I'd be cool and then leaving when you disrespected me isn't a trick. It's a boundary. You have 26 days. The typing bubble appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then, Ethan. I'm not going anywhere. Ethan, this is my home. Ethan, you'll have to evict me. I stared at that message for a long second, then set my phone down. Because that was the moment this stopped being a breakup and started becoming a war. There's a version of justice people like to imagine. It's fast, clean, immediate. You draw a line, someone crosses it, and consequences fall into place like dominoes. Neat, satisfying, final. That version doesn't exist. What exists is paperwork, waiting, money, and a kind of slow, grinding patience that feels less like victory and more like endurance. Ethan did not leave. Of course he didn't. The moment he said, "You'll have to evict me," I knew exactly what kind of process I was stepping into. Not because I'd done it before, but because I understood systems. And systems, unlike people, behave predictably once you learn their rules. By Wednesday, I got the first call. Not from him, from his mother, Diane Calloway. I had met her twice before. Both times she had smiled too sweetly, like she was evaluating me while pretending not to. "Avery, honey," she said when I answered. "I just spoke to Ethan. He's a wreck." I didn't respond. "I'm really disappointed in you," she continued. "You're a grown woman, and this tantrum, it's beneath you." There it was, the reframing. I leaned back against Ben's kitchen counter, letting her talk. "He said you humiliated him," she went on, "in front of everyone, over something so small." Small. I closed my eyes for a second. "Diane," I said calmly, "your son invited his ex-girlfriend into my home without asking me, then told me to accept it, or the relationship was over. I accepted." A pause. Then, lighter, dismissive. "Oh, don't be so literal. He didn't mean it like that." "Of course he didn't. They never do. He was just upset," she added. "You know how he gets." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because that sentence explained more about Ethan than anything he had ever said himself. "You're right," I said. "I do know how he gets. That's why he has until the 31st to move out." Her tone sharpened immediately. "You can't just throw him out like that. He lives there." "No," I said, "he doesn't. He has nowhere to go. That's not my responsibility anymore." Another pause. Then, softer, edged with accusation. "After everything he's done for you?" I looked around Ben's apartment, at the borrowed space, at the suitcase by the wall, at my own life temporarily displaced. "What exactly has he done for me?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just exhaled, sharp and disappointed. "You're making a mistake," she said. "A big one." "No," I replied. "I'm correcting one." And I hung up. The next move came 2 days later, and it was smarter. I got a call from my building manager, Frank. "Avery," he said, sounding uneasy. "Hey, I got a weird request from your unit." My stomach tightened slightly. "From Ethan?" I asked. "Yeah," Frank said. "He called saying you abandoned the apartment, said you've been acting unstable. He asked if we could change the locks for his safety." For a second, I didn't speak, because that wasn't just petty. That was strategic. He was trying to turn absence into leverage, trying to rewrite the narrative while I wasn't there to contest it. "Frank," I said evenly, "whose name is on the lease?" "Yours," he said immediately. "And is Ethan listed as a tenant?" "No." "Then you already know the answer." He exhaled. "Yeah, I figured. Just wanted to confirm. I'm not changing anything without your authorization." "Good," I said. Then, after a beat, "Also, he has an unauthorized guest staying there." "A guest?" Frank repeated. "His ex-girlfriend," I said. There was a pause on the line. Then a low whistle. "Yeah," Frank muttered. "You need to get him out of there." "I'm working on it," I said. And I was. No. Step 1 cost me $150. A process server, not a text, not a call. A legal document delivered in person. A 30-day notice to quit. Formal, binding, real. The clock started ticking the moment it touched his hands. Step 2 was about reclaiming what was mine. Not emotionally. Physically. The server. My workstation. The espresso machine. The bar. All the things he had been enjoying while calling the apartment his home. I texted him. Me. "I'll be there tomorrow at 10 a.m. with a civil standby to collect my property. You are required to let me in." No response. Of course. Friday morning, I stood in the lobby with 2 police officers. Civil standby. Neutral. Unemotional. Exactly what I needed. "You Avery?" one of them asked. "Yes." "All right," she said. "Let's go." We took the elevator up together. The same elevator I had stood in a week earlier, leaving my own party. The same numbers ticking upward, but this time I wasn't leaving. I was taking something back. I used my key. The door didn't open. Deadbolt. From the inside. The officer stepped forward and knocked. "Police," she called. "Open the door." Silence. Then movement. Then the click. The door opened slowly. And there he was. Ethan, wearing my robe. Hair a mess, eyes tired but defiant. And behind him, on my couch, Sophie, curled up like she belonged there, like she had always belonged there. For a brief second, something sharp tried to rise in my chest. Jealousy, anger, something, but it didn't last. Because the reality was too clear. This wasn't betrayal anymore. This was confirmation. You can't just show up like this, Ethan snapped. The officer didn't even look at him. Ma'am, she said to me, go ahead. Then to him, he's on the lease. You're not. Let her get her things. Sophie sat up slowly. Ethan clenched his jaw. This is our place now, he said. I looked at him, then at her, then back at him. Is your name on the lease? I asked. He said nothing. Did you pay last month's $4,200 rent? I continued. Silence. Then sit down, I said calmly, and let me work. He sat. Ben and Lucas followed me in. Witnesses. Quiet. Watching. I walked straight to the hall closet, opened the door, and there it was. My system. The server rack. The brain of Halo. I started unplugging it piece by piece. Carefully. Methodically. Behind me, Ethan's voice. You're taking that? Yes. The lights won't work, I finished. You'll have to use switches. Lucas almost smiled. Next, my workstation. Custom built. $5,000 in hardware. Ethan stepped forward. You can't take that. I use it. You have a laptop, I said without looking at him. This is mine. Ben started boxing it up. Kitchen. Espresso machine. $900. I unplugged it. No, Avery, come on, Ethan said. That's ours. I turned. Was it? I asked. He didn't answer. Finally, the bar cart. $800 in liquor. Top shelf. Carefully selected. I grabbed a box and started loading bottles. One by one. Sophie watched silently. Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but didn't. Because there are moments when reality becomes too obvious to fight. We were in and out in 15 minutes. Fast. Clean. Efficient. Just like I had planned. Yeah. At the door, Ethan spoke again. You're really doing this, he said. I turned. Met his eyes. No, I said. You already did this. Then I held up the paper. The notice. You have 28 days left, I said. After that, the sheriff comes. His expression shifted. Finally. Fear. I opened the door, stepped out, and left them there, in a silent, stripped apartment, together, exactly the way he had insisted on. In the elevator down, Lucas let out a breath. Damn, he said. Ben shook his head. She really thought you'd cave. I leaned back against the wall. Closed my eyes for a second. No, I said quietly. He did. But I already knew something they didn't. This wasn't over. Not even close. Because people who rely on entitlement rarely walk away quietly when it's taken from them. And Ethan? Ethan wasn't done fighting. He was just getting started. The next 2 months were not dramatic. That's the part nobody tells you. Justice doesn't arrive with a soundtrack. It doesn't feel powerful or clean or satisfying in the moment. It feels like waiting in uncomfortable chairs. Like signing documents you wish you didn't need. Like paying money to fix something you didn't break. Ethan did not leave at the end of the 30 days. Of course he didn't. About a week before the deadline, Diane called again. Her tone was different this time. Less confident. More urgent. Avery, she said, you can't actually go through with this. I didn't respond. Ethan is a mess, she continued. He's not thinking clearly. And if you evict him, do you understand what that does? It stays on his record. Permanently. It could ruin his life. I leaned back in my chair at my lawyer's office, staring at the neat stack of paperwork in front of me. He's had 30 days to find somewhere else, I said. Avery, please, she pressed. Sophie left. That made me pause. Not because I cared. Because it was predictable. He's alone, she added. He can't afford a deposit. He doesn't have savings like you do. I closed my eyes briefly, not in sympathy, in recognition. This was the same pattern, just dressed differently. His choices, someone else's responsibility. I'm not his girlfriend anymore, I said. He's not my responsibility. You're being cruel. No, I replied. I'm being consistent. She inhaled sharply. You're going to regret this. I opened my eyes. No, I said again. I'm not. And I ended the call. Friday came. I went back to the apartment with Ben after work. Nothing had changed. His things were still there. The lights still didn't work. The place looked dim, hollow, like something had been drained out of it. He didn't open the door, didn't answer texts, didn't engage, which meant Monday morning I was sitting across from my lawyer, retainer, $500, filing fees, court costs, time, energy, all of it mine to carry. We filed the unlawful detainer, formal eviction. The process started. And then we waited. It took weeks. Court date scheduled. He didn't show. Default judgment. Then another wait for the sheriff's notice to vacate. 5 more days. 5 days that stretched longer than the 30 before them. 45 days total after the notice expired. 45 days of me living out of a suitcase at Ben's place. 45 days of paying rent on an apartment I couldn't use. That's the part people don't celebrate, the cost of standing your ground. The day the sheriff came, I was there. Not because I had to be, because I needed to see it end. 2 deputies, Frank, the building manager, and me. The door opened faster this time. Ethan stood there, unshaven, eyes red, anger and desperation sitting side by side in his expression. "You can't do this," he said immediately. "This is my home." One of the deputies stepped forward. "Sir," she said calmly, "you've been served. You have 15 minutes to gather essentials." He laughed. A sharp, unstable sound. "This is insane," he said, looking at me. "You're insane. You're obsessed with me." I didn't respond, because none of that mattered anymore. He started pacing, then yelling, then bargaining, then shouting again. The cycle was fast, messy, loud, exactly what I had avoided becoming. Eventually, they had to guide him out, firmly, not violently, but without negotiation. He didn't go quietly. He didn't go with dignity. He went the way people go when they realize, too late, that control was never actually theirs. After he was gone, the apartment was silent, not the curated silence of a pause playlist, not the intentional quiet of a Sunday morning. A different kind, empty. Frank exhaled. "All right," he said, "let's take a look." We walked in together, and that's when I saw it. Not mess, damage, intentional, deliberate, personal. The hardwood floors, scraped. Long, deep gouges like someone had dragged something sharp across them again and again. The sofa, my sofa, ruined. Red wine soaked deep into the fabric, staining it beyond repair. The digital displays on the wall, smashed. Screens cracked, wires exposed. The kitchen sink, clogged with something thick and hardened. Flour, coffee grounds, water turned into paste. I stood there taking it in, piece by piece, detail by detail, not reacting, just observing. Because anger would have been easy. This required something else. Frank shook his head slowly. "This is bad." "Estimate?" I asked. He hesitated. "At least 11 grand, maybe more." I nodded once. Not because it didn't matter, because I had already crossed the point where emotional reactions were useful. Then I saw it, on the kitchen counter, a crumpled piece of paper under a fast food bag. I picked it up, unfolded it. "Hope it was worth it. You ruined my life, so I ruined your sanctuary. You'll die alone." I read it once, then again, then folded it neatly and put it in my pocket. That note paid for itself, 10 times over. The legal process after that was efficient. The landlord used my deposit and went after Ethan and Sophie for the remaining damages. I filed in small claims. Maximum amount $10,000. Receipts, photos, documentation. Everything organized. Everything clear. Court day. Ethan showed up with Diane. He looked smaller somehow, less certain, but still defiant. "Your Honor," he started. "She's abusive. She locked me out. The judge raised a hand. "I have the eviction record," he said. "Let's focus on damages." Ethan faltered, shifted. "Tried again." "It was already like that," he said. "She's just trying to get money from me." I stood when it was my turn. Calm. Measured. "Your Honor," I said. "These are photos from the night of the party. Time-stamped. This is the apartment in perfect condition." I handed them over. "And these," I continued, "are photos from the walkthrough after eviction. Then the receipts, the sofa, the repairs, the legal costs. Finally, the note." The judge read it, then looked at Ethan. "Did you write this?" Ethan went pale. Silence. That was answer enough. Judgment, $10,000. The fallout was not immediate. It rarely is, but it was permanent. Eviction record, court judgment, credit damage, wage garnishment. Slow, methodical, unavoidable. Sophie disappeared. Of course she did. The moment the apartment stopped being impressive. The moment the system stopped working. The moment reality replaced atmosphere. She was gone. Diane stopped calling. There was nothing left to argue.
Just her.
And me? I got my apartment back. Eventually. It wasn't the same. The floors had to be repaired. The sofa was gone. The walls patched. The screens replaced. I didn't rebuild Halo. Not yet. For a while I lived with simple lights, switches, silence, and it was peaceful, in a way I hadn't expected. Because in the end, this wasn't a clean win. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't cheap. It wasn't easy. It was extraction. Messy. Expensive. Slow, but complete. He thought he had power. He thought I would fold. That I would trade self-respect for comfort. That I would choose him over myself. He thought I would blink. I didn't. And that made all the difference.